All right, everybody, we are back again for season 2.1, talking about everything life after ball. But first, before we jump into it, want to give a shout out to my boy, Coach Jay. He's a few months behind me into retirement, but I know the process is going. So I want to say, hey, bro, just keep going. Just keep trying to figure it out, piece it together as you go day by day. Don't look at the long run, right? Because it is a journey. Right? There are roads and the bumps in the roads that we go through in this retirement side, but you'll figure it out eventually. I don't know the key. Like I said, I'm only a few months ahead of you. I'm just trying to find things to do that give me excitement. Also want to give a shout out to Edge Peptide, where I went and got my stem cell treatment done in my left knee. Was a thing that I've been holding off on for a long time. Didn't want to go underneath the knife. Figured it was something that was good for me to do now, to kind of prolong that getting knee replacements. So shout out to Edge Peptide for the stem cell treatment. Super excited where that goes. Today, again, we got with us Doherty and we got Tara. And today we are talking about the real world. Whatever people consider the real world, I don't know what it is. I'm still trying to figure it out. But the thing that I want to kick it off with is an interesting talk I had with a new client that came in yesterday. New PT, him and his dad came in, and his dad was like, how do we navigate, and is this a negative mindset to have when it comes to trying to prove doubters wrong? And I told him, I look at people like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, Michael Phelps, all those great athletes that always try to prove others wrong, and it ended up being a championship mindset. But how do you flip that into a positive? And then with that, does that balance into the real world? Can that be used in a positive way? And I guess I spin this question over to you, ladies. Can that, trying to prove doubters wrong, can it be used in a positive way in the real world? And is there space for that?
Well, I'll go first if you want me to. Well, yeah, I hear that a lot with athletes as well. And usually I'm always trying. Okay, it's not me. Okay, it's in your do. Sorry. Well, usually I always try to find things that can drive people towards something. And I don't consider it as a bad thing necessarily. If that is your your driver for exceeding or performing at a better level, then obviously use it. Just like fear, for instance, what would you be afraid of not accomplishing these things? So I don't consider it necessarily a bad thing, because I hear it also in business corporations as well. Those that are very driven for becoming moving to the next place, a better position, more responsibility, whatever that is, could also be that maybe there has a history of somebody doubting them. They have a history of doubting themselves. And just by having that as a driven force, then that could actually be a positive thing. So I don't necessarily consider it as a negative thing, to be honest. However, if it's going to be with a negative outcome and never perceiving yourself good enough, then I would probably start to maybe have a reframing of what that means to prove others wrong. That would be my take on that. What about you, Tara?
Yeah, I feel the same way. But first of all, I guess one of the things that is important to clarify for me is what is the real world? Because sometimes I think that just by saying, well, my sport world was not real, that unto itself is, kind of suggesting that people have been off playing in some sort of la la land for a really, really long time. So I think that making sure that we say that sport life was real. It was real to you. It was real to everybody that was involved in it. That's an important thing to think. And I think that sport has a really positive, it gives you a really positive avenue to learn how to function in the quote unquote real world,
it's
whatever that real world
but I think
is.
it will still record her.
It teaches you drive, determination, how to compete.
Well, lost her? Yes, we lost her. Yeah, I mean, we'll yeah. Now she's really, really gone. But we'll cut that part out. But I think it's super important. What she was talking about was talking about the real world. Because what is the real world? Like, I don't know the definition of what that actually is, because was our sport, I feel like the sports world was very real to us in that time. But then when we step outside of it, like, we're still trying to navigate what everybody's been doing for what we consider a normal life in between that time. Because our job has been playing sports, right? We've been showing up to the facilities. I'll let Tara back in.
Yes.
But yes, so we've been showing up to facilities and been going to practice, having games and stuff, but we haven't really, I guess, essentially what some people have been saying, working a real job, working the 9 to 5, even though our hours are just as long or longer than some people actually know about. Like, if you look, for instance, we look at training camp. Sometimes you're showing up at the facility at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and you're there all day until 8 p.m. Right? And yeah, we have breaks in between there, but you show up, you got film study, you got weight room, you hit the field, right? We got practice. After that, you got lunch. Then you got a little bit of downtime. Then you got meetings again. Then you go through a walkthrough. Then you have a little bit of downtime again where you can do treatment and stuff like that. Then you got film study again. Then we hit the field for our second practice, right? Then you have another film study and then dinner, and then you go home. And that's a full day right there. Like, so how is
It's
that?
probably longer.
Right. So how is that not considered the real world? Although like people pay money to come watch us play and they think that like, but there's so much more that goes into what we do on the back end. So what is, yeah, there's a big difference in what we do because what we do is so physical, but there's a huge mental part of what we do, having to study film, having to be energetic, right? Having to be in a good mind state when you're going out there to play, going out there to practice, and just keeping yourself like grounded through it all. And I think that's the hardest part for people in the real world to realize is that there's more that goes into it.
Yeah. I think it's actually interesting that you, as a former athlete, or maybe you're still an athlete, but you consider it as a separate thing. Like that was my sporting career, and then there's the real world. Because actually, when I do both work with both ends, which is the corporation part, and then there's the athlete part, and I always ask people, what do you see the comparison of a pro athlete and a sort of a pro corporate executive is? And actually, there's so many similarities in it, which means that they have to be physically active, the athlete, obviously, where the other one might not be as physically active, but they're performing and delivering some sense of execution every single day. They have a busy schedule. They are actually requiring a lot of things for themselves and of themselves. So I actually consider there's a lot of things that needs to be in the preparing phase for both parties, actually. So I would actually like to push that to return the question is that where is it that you see that there's so much difference for what you consider as a real life that you might consider the non-sport world to be that you didn't have already? Because I see there's actually a lot of skill set that you have developed due to that high demanding career that you have as an athlete. So where do you yourself see that there's such a big difference from it?
I think it's more of just control of our schedule. That's probably the biggest difference I see in being in the real world is the fact of now our time isn't so much planned out. Because when we're in football and stuff, right, you have a planned schedule, right? You show up at one time for breakfast, right? When meetings start, somebody else is running the meeting, and you've got to study for that, right? Then after that, you got to be ready for practice. You got to study the playbook, right? Then after you have weightlifting and stuff, which is kind of the fun part. Then you got treatment. Then you got lunch. Then another meeting. Right, it's run by somebody else. And then by 8 o'clock at night, right, or however late it is, you can check out, right? Where I think when we go into the real world, it's more of, depending on what role you step into and where you're working at, it's more controlled by us. Like if you think about the everyday desk job, like when you go into the corporate world, like you're given assignments to do, but there's nobody really looking over you all the time and you have a deadline to get it done, but I remember working in a little bit of the corporate world doing sales and a little bit of at a different location gym that I was working at. It was like, hey, you had to turn this in by this time. But nobody really told me like I had to work on it every day. Like it was up to me to work on it if I wanted to be good at it. But at the same time, I was like, so I just show up at 9 and then like when I'm done with my work, I'm good to go. We were just not used to that, like, I guess, aspect of that structure. And then like, also, if you look at the college side of things, for a lot of these athletes, your class schedule is also planned out for you because you go to an advisor, right? Like an advisor tells you what classes you can take and which ones are a little bit easier so you can pass to get by, so you can get a degree and so you can stay on the field, right? And then that part comes into us now. Like now we have to plan that everyday life. And like we talked about on the other episode, going into the family life, like, hey, like now your spouse like wants you to mow the grass. They want you to do laundry. They want you to do the dishes and little things like that we're not used to. I remember in college, even in the NFL, right? You just put your laundry on a loop and right, you throw it in the thing and then it's in your locker the next morning. Same thing for game day. Like, hey, if like my helmet, now my cleats and all my stuff I need taken, I just put it to the side and somebody comes by, picks it up, and it's at the facility when I'm ready. And like now, like all of us have to do that. Now I stay strict on myself currently still with how I plan out my clothes for the next day. Like I have them laid out in the morning because I know that that's what I want to wear. So when I wake up, I can just put it on and I can go. My bag's packed for the next day. So like I still try to keep that same routine, but some guys it's tough to get into that routine, and then also like a lot of that planning and structure comes down to you now.
I'll let you speak, Tara.
I do my own laundry now. I'm good now. I'm really good at my laundry. I separate everything. I like it. Like, I hang my stuff up in a certain way. Only certain stuff goes in the dryers, like whites, darks, things that are lint free. My mom was big on that. So I come from military family, so I had that structure before.
So far, so good.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on and where I'm in some large tower, some far land, trapped in a building. I missed a chunk of what we said because what you guys were talking about when I had to zip off the line here. But first of all, I'll just say that putting your laundry on a loop and just expecting someone to do it, Coop isn't going to fly. Okay, good. I'm like, no, it's involved. I do not think that's going to work somehow. Back to what I was saying earlier, real world, I guess, like just taking the negative connotation out of that for people that do retire, because there is sometimes when you get into the so-called real world, folks are like, you're done playing now, like as in playing, in the connotation of you're done being a little kid, you're done with your games, come and step into this sort of real life. And that can be very upsetting, a shock, again, and offensive maybe to, like, as you described, all the work that you had to do, all the stuff you had to put into your careers. Right away, I guess I'm taking a bit of an exception to what that means. Like sometimes I've just seen it really hurt athletes who have retired to say, well, did my life mean nothing? Was I wasting the last, however many of the years of my life playing this silly game? Now I have to actually do a really important, normal thing. So first of all, that's something to talk about and consider, because I've seen that be hurtful to folks that have retired, and it doesn't, play well with already the mental health challenges that many do face once they do retire. And back to your sort of original question about like that, having to prove yourself. Well, I guess I say I look at that as an advantage that you do learn from sport, because you're used to having somebody, always behind you wanting to clean out your locker. And so that does give you, sort of your head's always on a swivel, like waiting for, wanting to make sure that you're doing a good job, you're vigilant, you're pleasing folks, you're attentive to what the requirements are. You're used to being coached. Someone says do something, you do it. So I think that those attributes and that drive to do well is something that serves you. I think the only negative that I've seen is that sometimes, you're doing, folks say that athletes that have come out of this environment do it too much. And they're like, the brown noser, or the, that person like, oh no, here he comes again. Like he's always has to be the best. And so there becomes sort of an environment of competitiveness and hostility in some settings that maybe aren't used to that environment, where you're always fighting for your job. And so it's like, what's wrong with him? Like he's here 4 hours earlier than everybody else. He's always got his work in on time, like, and people start to resent that. So I've noticed that it's like maybe some climatizing to what are the expectations of these new environments that you're in. Is it like that? That's something that maybe even to have at a job interview, like what's to be expected? Do I have to fight for dinner at the dinner table? Like, is there 4 other people waiting to replace me tomorrow if I don't turn in my report with perfect grammar? Like, I don't know. I think those are some of the struggles that need to be kind of talked out and planned for as part of the retirement process. That's what I've heard athletes say, like, I don't know how to be. I don't know what the expectations are. And I'm like, well, does anybody in any new job? So it's like sussing out your environment. You've been in like a career for a very long time, and a way of life for a very long time. So you need some, sort of, I guess, retraining. But as I was actually thinking about today, sorry, long answer. I guess to be clear, I don't totally know the answer, but is there ever anything wrong about doing your best? Is there ever a situation where doing your best and really trying to do your best in all circumstances is a bad thing? Is anybody ever going to lose from that situation? So that's sort of what I've told athletes that are saying, I'm having trouble fitting it. I'm having trouble kind of like, people think I'm just, like Susie, like brown noser, always trying to be, the best at everything. And I'm ticking everybody off. And so go kick rocks. Like, I'm going to do my best I possibly can. And that is never not going to serve me. I don't know. Is that the answer? Is that an answer?
I don't know the answer, because I agree with you on that. Like, it's hard for us when we go into these positions, because if you look at a lot of corporations, you look at a lot of jobs, all the stuff out here in the real world, people are looking for athletes, former athletes, people that have been coached, people that have played at high levels, all this stuff, because we have that expectation, we have that competitiveness, we have that drive. But then we come into a place where sometimes there aren't always people like us or think like us or move like us or compete how we did or ever went to that high level, right? Because they went into, maybe after high school, they went straight to college and they were getting a degree and then they got a job. Or during the college, they were doing internships, right? So they had a little bit more time getting to, they got there faster than what we did, right? Because we were still doing our sports. If you played at a pro level, even if you went to the Olympics, you went to the highest level you could at your sport, right? So they had a little bit more time getting into that world. So then their competitiveness, not to say that everybody isn't competitive or people in those positions aren't competitive, but now we're coming from a world where we've had to be competitive. And like you said, look over our shoulder all the time and wonder and get things done, like, because our job might be taken. So when we come into those environments, it seems like we're brown nosing or we're trying to be the best at what we're trying to do because that's all we know how to do. And it's hard to get out of that mentality. And I don't think it's ever great to even get out of it, because then we talk about what people consider now that society is becoming soft, right? And that's because now we've kind of, I would say people have dulled down that competitiveness and that fire and that energy, the same way that we talked about in the earlier episodes, is like how we talk in the locker room. Like, some of those things obviously a lot of those things can't be said outside of the locker room, but some of that stuff is, I guess, asked to be harnessed and pushed down a little bit to kind of fit in with the environment that you're at.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think the question for you guys is how do you fit in those places and actually not, like we talked about earlier, use that drive of doubt and in a good way, but also get it in a way that it can rub off on people on the right way to get them to show that your competitiveness and wanting to be great isn't bad. It's just the expectations and standards that we've had that we want to also extend to others to help the team grow. And I think that's the part that I also look at now for the position that I'm in, is like, I still have that competitiveness. I still have that fire. I still have that drive, but it's in a way that I use it now to help my team continue to grow. And every day, like, tell them, like, hey, like, the reason I am the way I am now is because I want you guys to eat and live well. And that's the way to get there, is using the tools that we've been given before and everything that we practiced. It can be translated over. Now, I'm in the gym space, so I don't know every other space. Like, if you're talking about working at Amazon or FedEx or UPS or any of those big corporations, I don't know how those places operate, but I can tell you that maybe it would benefit to have people that always want to be their best. So yeah, I guess I would ask you guys, how do you harness that? How do you fit in? Is fit in even the right question? Like, do we want to fit in?
So that's, for me, that's a lot of red alerts in the dashboard when you say that, because I don't think that, I think that would be the biggest mistake, to try to harness or even change something that you're probably genetically is wired to be. So why would you change that, first of all? Because, again, there's a reason why not everybody's professional athletes. That's because they don't have that specific ways of being competitive. Obviously, it's not for everybody. That's why it's so hard to become one of the best. And if you start to actually embrace it and use it as an advantage and use it for something that whatever corporation or whatever real life you will move on to, that they can actually see a benefit of having someone who's actually trained with this. It's the same as when you have people coming from the military. It's so firm on everything, and it's actually usually something that is really good because they have something they can bring in from being in war, which has nothing to do in the corporate life. It's safe, we don't have to worry and all these things, but you can. And so can you as a former athlete. You have been disciplined with a lot of skill set that should definitely be something that you should not try to turn it down. On the contrary, I would say, you might not even want to be a leader, but it is a leadership skill for yourself. And with that, you will obviously be able to, yeah, you might be the one that seems like you're competitive, but it could also be that you're just used to wanting to be the best of yourself. It's not necessarily that you're competing with everybody else. You might just still be wanting to create results because that's your driving force. I think it's super important as an athlete, whatever you come from, that you embrace what you have been taught and how you have been developed because of that, not despite of that. So I think that's really important, that you bring that on as a gift, to be honest, as a gift for those that see the benefit of having that. And I also think it's important to have that open dialogue for whatever you decide to get into afterwards, that you actually put the cards on the table, be honest, say, look, I'm used to this. This is how my nature operates. I have to be on a busy schedule, maybe, or maybe not. I'm done with it, or maybe I want to continue in that sort of direction. But you actually just be honest about it instead of pretending to be something you will never be. Because again, I mean, on a genetic level, you have a driving force, and that's why you become that's why you came that far in the athletic sports. So why would you turn that down? I wouldn't at all. On the contrary, they should actually really be loving to having a person who has that big of a disciplined background, because most people don't today. So that in itself would be a huge advantage, if you ask me. So don't try to be what you came from. Definitely not.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Really well said. And I would also add a little bit to what you just said, Dorothy, was just I've seen where it's gone wrong, and I'll speak to that in a moment, but just really understanding, like, having folks define for you, sometimes this is intimidating for them, what are your metrics of success? Like, I know what is expected of me on the playing field. And so how do you define success, and how do I get better and grow through this organization or wherever it is you are? If you're, I experienced myself personally, but also worked with a lot of folks that have retired, again, on the physiological side, but also just as to how these types of things affect them physiologically and their health and their well-being is when you go back to fitting in, like, that your metrics or the metrics they say they have aren't what they expect from an athlete. I know a lot of folks don't know how to work with athletes. They don't understand their drive. They've never experienced it, as you've said. So sometimes culturally it is a real challenge. And if, I think the biggest thing is if an athlete is an ex-athlete, and I don't think you're ever an ex-athlete. Sorry, I'm fumbling around with this. This is a bit of a actual salient point right now, because I'm dealing with some folks right now that are really struggling. So their concerns are this: they go to a corporation. The corporation says, we want you to do, say it's sales or build widgets or whatever it is that you do, and so you have to build this many widgets. And so they do their job, and then they're not rewarded the same way. And when you're playing, you might get more playing time, or you might get, a bigger salary. You may have, a different type of contract, but the metrics don't always line up with the rewards. And that's what's difficult in the quote unquote real world. So it's like, I did all these things. I trained hard. I ate well. I slept. I showed up. I did all the things, and it didn't work. And so that's sort of a common, like, thing for folks that have retired. Like, how do I fit in this? And there's great, I guess, disappointment, as in, like, you do all the things you're supposed to do, and the outcome does not, sort of isn't rewarded by the way that I'm doing it. And so it can breed a real confusion for folks that have lived in this athletic world for a really long time, and they're driven by performance, and they perform well, and they don't get the bonus. They don't get the car. They don't get the rewards that maybe they would normally expect to get. And so a lot of folks go and work for themselves, and they gather with their old flock and create their own business, because they can control, like, if we work hard, this is what happens, or at least they think they can control that. So some of the issues that have come up for folks that have been at this for a while, that we're just speaking to two Olympians, married, raised 4 kids, and has navigated this world, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And the sometimes not part is that it bred more perfectionism in them, their mindset. They're like, I just have to work harder. I have to try to look better, smell better, dress better. And then maybe the rewards will come, and then they didn't come. And so there was just this real confusion, and then a failure to start, like, paralyzed with I don't know what the heck's expected of me out here in this real world. I don't know how to fit in or belong. So fear of failure becoming exceptionally high and never doing anything. And so there's a culture of, I guess, post retirement for year over year that just is sort of like, I'm so frustrated, I don't know what to do. And so I don't want to launch my new company because I'm afraid it will be rejected, and they have to, extreme perfectionism sets in. So there's some navigating to do, and I guess courage to build around if this isn't the environment where you can be successful and being not afraid to move on. I don't know. I think it's something that needs to be dug into. Yeah, that was a lot of information again, but there's a lot of thoughts I have around this, and it's not a formula, but to the earlier points, like recognizing what makes you great, and from the outside, asking for that feedback and that what are the expectations, what can I do to ensure success in this particular organization, this particular place, this particular relationship, in my house with my wife, like what will make me be successful, and getting used to, starting off with having those expectations and those boundaries, because that's what you're used to. And then maybe as time goes on, you'll be free to let some of that go a little bit, as you're afraid, you're not always worried about being replaced. But I do know that left unchecked for a very long time, it can lead to real perfectionism and people getting stuck and paralyzed in the, I don't know what the heck to do with myself. I don't know how to be successful in a world that isn't rewarding the things that I am used to doing to be successful. And it can lead to paralysis and a whole bunch of other things that I think that we need to dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, how do we dig into, because you talked about the frustration of not being rewarded, and you talked about the frustration of, people not living up to those same expectations, and then also getting the paralysis of, the perfectionism and being stuck where you're at. But then there's also, the energy, the anger, the frustration, everything that you have built in, that we had a space to let it out, right? Like most of us harness that and use it to the game field or use it to the track or whatever sport that we play, like that we can use to our advantage in that world. What we're trying to figure out is how do we use it now in the real world? Like what do you do with that energy and that frustration? Because like we talked about in the previous episode, like you can't walk down the sidewalk and just punch somebody. You can't just walk down and just tackle somebody or anything like that, because that's just not acceptable, right? Where is the outlet for these former athletes, and then not taking it home, right? Because then it turns into, the stuff that gets really bad and it gets put on the news because all your anger and frustration, and then you don't even know how to talk about it to the people that you are living with, and then the people at work don't fully understand what you're just coming from, so you can't talk to them, and then like you said, you end up in this paralysis. And sometimes people start their own companies, with people that are former athletes like themselves, so maybe they have a little bit better understanding. But then there's also that point where you feel like you hit a plateau and the company's not growing, or you're not going in the trajectory that you're expecting to go at. And then there comes even more frustration and anger. And you're trying to navigate, how do I get past this and make this be successful and be rewarded for it, like the same way you did? Because back when we were playing, right, hey, if I performed well in practice and I translated it over to the field, scoring touchdowns, making tackles, getting interceptions, whatever it may be, right, that's going to equal higher signing bonus, right, bigger contracts. Like, those rewards were coming. What do we have on the other side of the world? Like, yeah, you can, in the sales world, right, there's commission, right? So everything is based off of how you work, right? Personal training, right, is based off of how well you do with an athlete or you do with a client, right? You can see the results and maybe they sign up and do more or whatever it may be. But I don't know the organizations or corporate side of the world to, like, what are the bonuses and rewards to kind of keep people motivated and continue to push and not get like in that mundane routine of just like, hey, I clock in at 9, do my couple assignments, go to lunch, grab a coffee, do a little bit more of my assignment, check out at 5. Like that to me would burn a hole in me, because I wouldn't know what to do. I'd be like, man, like what am I working towards? What is the end goal? What am I driven towards? Like what is keeping me pushing to like want to show up every day? Because we know when we were playing sports, like showing up every day was because for your team, right? I wanted to go out there and compete. I wanted to do well, right? But also like I wanted that camaraderie in the locker room, because we could talk about things that you can't talk about on the outside. So what is it that, like, how do we help athletes find the right spaces to be in and find places to let go of that frustration and anger? Because I think that's a hard part for a lot of us, is like I'm in a gym, so I can throw around weights, I can throw a med ball, and also just having a daughter, like I don't want my frustrations to be projected onto her or anything like that. I want her to like, yeah, she'll see me times that are down, but how do I communicate that to her? And I think that's another hard part for a lot of us is like, how do you communicate that stuff in a language that others can understand us, but also so they can understand what we've been through and what we're trying to navigate through.
Well, first of all, obviously, I would say I would start to address what that anger is really about. Because is it anger actually? Or is it because that, again, genetically, there's something wired in you where you're actually used to have a lot of adrenaline that you need to burn off. And now all of a sudden, your chemistry is not being met. So that in itself, I mean, in bottom line, we could say to any of these frustration periods for anybody, they would need somebody to speak to guide them through this, because it seems like there's also a lot of lack of clarity. Maybe there's this lack of control, what you're saying, that which is usually what when I normally have to guide people through this, which could be in both the corporate world and the athlete world. If you're not going towards something that gives you purpose or doesn't even match your passion, then already by then, what am I then motivated by? I'm frustrated because I don't have direction. I have no idea what my goal setting is, which you would know as an athlete. You know exactly how the season looks at this. Whenever we've done with the pre-season training, we know that's because something else is going to happen, and we know how long that is going to last. So we have everything scheduled, which means that that same framework you would need to incorporate for yourself in your next chapter, which would be that I want to accomplish something in this because that was what I can recognize and that make me feel in a certain way, which is obviously usually also individual. So it's about actually adding in the same things for the next period of your life. So where do I want to go? How do I want to feel? What motivates me? And like you said, just by the idea of checking in at 9 or 8 or whatever it is, almost like it's stamping in, stamping out, have no idea what you've been doing, have no idea how good that went, and you were never even being met on that. All these chemicals of feel good. It didn't even feel good because I had no idea what I was doing. And I think that's actually not even just for athletes, to be honest. That's just for human beings, which is what goes so wrong for so many people, actually, if we want to build that comparison as well. So I think for one thing, I would always say find somebody who can guide you through that process, because it is kind of like you come from this protected, which is not really protected, but from a certain concept of what it would be to be an athlete and to perform and to accomplish something. But then how can you move that into another part of your life? And just by finding that puzzle in a different settings, that would obviously need somebody to guide you through all these steps. So you will see where the benefit from that is, instead of seeing it as a new dangerous place to be, which it doesn't have to be, obviously. But again, back to the physical part, in terms of maybe it's a physical anger, maybe it's actually a physical competitive energy. It could also be so in any sense, I would always recommend, if that is a need for somebody, well, then you obviously have to add that in as a permanent thing in your life, because physical part of getting rid of some overproduced energy is what I want to use for it, but it's usually just the chemicals, because you don't burn off your stress levels, you don't burn off the cortisol, the testosterone, and all these things. So that would be for one thing, because the physical always match with the mental. And I think for a lot of athletes, when they stop, what I have heard also is that all of a sudden they're sick of all the training. So all of a sudden they don't really have that much training anymore, which can be a little bit dangerous for the physical part, because now I'm used to always being exhausted physically, but I also get burned out all the stress that I'm having. And now all of a sudden, I just rely completely on not having that, which can actually be like taking a drug away from people. So that would be like the basic part of that. Make sure you still have the exercise, whatever, not like you mentioned the way back we spoke as well. You don't have the expectation of it anymore, but now you can just do what you feel like doing, but still have that in. And also respect that a lot of what's controlling us is always about every chemical we have running in the system.
And that's actually my research is in that area, and that's what I help is work in stress and performance, and that's a huge part of what I do as a physiologist is manage that cascade of change while someone's training, but after when they're retirement and managing the adjustment in load. So number one, recognition that that's not, in my view, a suggestion. Just keep up that training. It's a necessity because we have to manage the cascade of hormones that comes out of training effectively because of the way you've been training. And again, managing cortisol, testosterone, that's a whole episode unto itself, is to have it come down safely so that you're not having, I guess a cortisol, huge hangover, whereby a byproduct of that is anger, or can be anger or depression or things, and it's involuntary. And that's something that is really, really a big part of the speeches I do outside of, I guess, today and the work I do is when you're in a particular state physiologically, some of these reactions are involuntary. A lot of them are. And so we have to be really, really careful that you're surrounded by people while you're playing, but after you're playing, that understand this and that don't make character judgments about your behavior around this, because it may not be truly reflective of who you are. It's a condition. You wouldn't judge a diabetic for having an insulin issue, or there is a physiological storm that needs to be navigated coming out of training. And so stopping the training or radically changing the training in the environment can't happen. You have to maintain that for a period of time so that your body adjusts and emotionally you adjust. So what does that mean? It means, and this is something honestly I'd love to chat about the detail of what to do, because it's something that is left unchecked. And then folks go off in this state of duress physiologically and make decisions about their lives that they might normally not make. One of the things I always say when you're in this sort of some particular states is cognitively you're not yourself, emotionally you're not yourself. Your normal state of urges, what you want to eat, what you want to do for sleep or whatever, are somewhat compromised. So you have to have incredible discernment, or those around you professionally that understand, like, is this what Coop would normally do? Is he planning to join the circus because that's something that he really wants to do? Like, is that the best path for him? Or is this like some sort of erratic sort of choice? Not that there's anything wrong with joining the circus, but I've watched athletes in competition when they've trained really hard, or around competition, when they've been pushed to the edge of training, do really erratic, crazy things. And I've seen it more so coming out of training, and the hormonal responses to the stress of not having that routine and all of the struggles around identity change and value change. That has a very profound physiological impact unto itself that adds to that piece that can totally, very radically modify your behavior outside of what is quote unquote normal for you. So people trying to make big decisions about their lives in that space will often find themselves, I don't know, bartending on a beach somewhere and thinking, how the freak did I get here? I think that's not what I planned to do. So management of coming out of that training volume needs to be dealt with very strategic. And that is something that I can definitely speak to. In order to do that, because you got to pay the bills right away, sometimes people's careers end unexpectedly and they don't have time to plan financially for what's next. So often folks will get involved in, maybe they join the fire department, maybe they go into the police department where they can have a team. There's something that they can do with that has a tangible outcome. I'm going to keep the city safe. I'm going to fight the fires. I'm going to get the cat out of the tree. Like something that has an outcome that is a reward, a definite reward. I've saved folks today. Or they go to med school if they can, where they have an opportunity to have a really measurable, you don't get by when you're a surgeon on a bad day. Like you have to be on all the time and apply your skills and your knowledge very seriously, because you're managing someone else's well-being. And so a lot of folks will find that they have success in getting into fields like that where they can make a measurable impact on a life. So police and fire often have that same camaraderie, and the training expectations are often very high. Also, I've seen success in folks that do a lot of things. Like they don't put all their eggs in this one basket. Maybe they have a job, but then they are doing something philanthropic. They develop, they go out and do, start a charity or work for a charity or something where they can have a measurable. The more they work, the more they try, the more they put themselves out there, the better the outcome, and it'll have a measurable impact on people. So there's often something that very altruistic that you can do to sort of use that anger, that emotion, of like, I really want to do good. I want to perform well and do good and have it matter to somebody. And genuinely, a lot of folks will find great value in that transition to a group environment where they are fighting crime, or they're fighting fires, or they're starting a charity or something like that. But often it will require a number of irons in the fire, some speaking gigs about your experiences. Like, how can you motivate other people starting a football school or an academy, things like that. So it's not one answer. It's a lot of different things to satisfy that need. But importantly, the recognition up front that you are going to have a quote unquote, I don't want to catastrophize this, but it's I see it that seriously because I worked with it so long. You're going to have a physiological condition that is going to come with retirement that needs strategic management to make sure you come out of it safely. And you're going to need to train and conduct your life in such a way to manage that. So informing those around you, coming out of this is going to be a process. I am not going to feel the same way. And there's a physiological root to that. And I have to manage that versus I'm just being a douchebag and I'm being nasty and awful and terrible to people. Like, there's actually something going on. And the fact that people aren't recognizing that is extremely disconcerting to me, because I've watched a lot of folks fall into deep depression and struggle after that was completely unavoidable if this was managed. So I think first and foremost, recognize that something needs to be done about coming out of training. And number two, are there avenues right away that could feed that? It takes a while to get on the police force and whatnot, but at least there's a training goal. Or is there a second chance sport that you can join, like we talked about earlier, some bobsleigh, skeleton, things like that, or second chance sports, and to allow people to keep up some sort of training. Those are a few comments I'd have about that. But that recognition is critical in my view around the physiological cost of retirement.
I think the hard part with that is getting athletes to recognize it and then speak about it, right? Because we talk about finding help and getting people to help you through that. But, a lot of what we have done, right, you kind of suppress like the things that are going bad or your emotions that are kind of weighing you down or that feel heavy on you to kind of just continue to go by, right? Or you push them down because you don't want to be considered soft. You don't want to speak out about like what's actually going wrong and what you need help with, because then you're considered weak. So a lot of us coming out of it are struggling to know where to find the help and who to speak to and also who to trust. Because I think that's another issue for us is like talking to people about what we're going through. In the sports world, sometimes you could talk about things that are going on and you might speak to it about a coach and another coach relays it to somebody else. And then it's seen as, oh, he's not checked in today, or he's not fully here, or whatever he's going through might hurt the way he plays. So let's move somebody up above him. Or maybe whatever he's gone through in the past is too much and like, let's bring in somebody else. So sometimes it's used against us. So you're kind of like, now you come into what we consider the real world, or we're getting ready for that. And how are we able to trust the people that we're speaking to, or the people that we're seeking help are actually there to help us? And I think that's a scary part for a lot of us, because we're not used to, and I think the world is getting a little bit better, right? Because you have people like you two that are helping athletes out. But there's still some of that old school mindset of like, hey, like whatever you're going through, like you figure it out. Right? Like you'll get through it, but as long as you show up and perform, like you'll be okay. But then you flip over and now that side is like you talked about, like that training load is now gone, right? Now you're no longer competing on Saturdays, Sundays, whenever your competition days are. So now like, what do I turn to? Like where am I going to like actually let go of whatever I'm going through and like figure out how to get past it? Because I think that's a hard part for a lot of us. I mean, I wouldn't say a lot of us because I don't know what everybody's going through, but I know for myself, like it's hard to know, like, who do I speak to when, times are getting tough and I kind of need to like reset or find out what I'm going through is not acceptable. Like is like, how do I do what I'm supposed to do on a daily basis without like feeling like I'm doing things wrong, or like I'm actually doing things in the correct way. Not that I need to be rewarded or anything like that, but like, hey, sometimes life gets real. And I don't think there's enough space for guys to talk about it and who to know to turn to. And that's just realistically, I know that I can turn to you two, right, and ask you guys about things that are going on because I trust in you guys, but there's not a lot of people that have that trust that have built up. And podcasting has become big for a lot of guys to share what they're going through or what they have gone through. Speaking to other guys that have been in the locker room, but then, yeah, who is there out there to trust, and like where can they find this help and kind of people to help them navigate through it all? Like we talked about, like the corporate world, like sometimes there is like there's an HR person and stuff like that, but again, we still have that mindset that might be like a GA that like they might leak that information to somebody else, and then my job's gone.
I would. No, you go ahead, Tara. I just want to back up everything you just said. It's not like I have much more in that context to add, actually. I mean, when we look at the type of sport, obviously what you come from is, from my knowledge by now, it's very conservative and it's very old school. However, they might like as an organization to seem like they're very innovative or they're protecting, and they might start slowly to do that. But for us to actually sit around and just wait for a change to happen will probably cost too much in people's health than it would be the recommended path to go down. So just like Tara said, I think just by the fact that a former athlete is actually going out there saying, hey, we actually need some more attention to this, is a huge step in itself. And we can only just talk about it more and more, especially you that have been an athlete and come from that, and also just be honest about it. Just like Tara said, if that many people are actually having these issues, that means you're definitely not alone, for sure. And also the more that they can actually say, this worked for me, maybe this community, sorry, I have a dog pushing me here. So maybe this community can actually support other people with the same issues. And then, step by step, spreading the message, just like we see a lot in top sport at the moment, globally, in any sport. We see a lot where there's actually articles writing about how much they are really struggling on a mental level, on all levels regarding the mental part, which could be the hectic schedule, it could be the physical health, actually. But so many things where they actually honestly come out in the media saying that I've had it, it's too much, I'm close to a breakdown. So obviously the more attention it gives and the more we can see that even the superheroes, they actually struggle with these things, then we can somehow relate to, oh, apparently it's not only me struggling with this. So hopefully that will lead us to be more open about it, not just as an athlete, but also in the community and also in the organizations, which could be the dream scenario. Like Tara said, that it would be ideal, of course, that they would offer some support and some help to transition out of that, from going from professional athlete and then going to the corporate world or the other next chapter. So I think there's a lot of things that would be wonderful. We could say, just go this way and everything will be solved, because again, we're also individual. So that journey will also be individual. So yeah, but just by doing this, I think it's super amazing, because hopefully a lot of athletes will be able to relate to it and see that there's actually a lot that can be done, and it should be done for sure. It's not like life ends just because you're not an athlete anymore.
That's for sure. It definitely doesn't end, because there's more to it afterwards. And I think that's the hard part for a lot of us to think about is plan B. What is next? Because like we talked about in the previous episodes, it's like we don't like to think that there's something else coming afterwards, right? We like to think that our sport's going to last forever. We like to stick to plan A to what's going on. But I think it leads us to our next episode, like you said, talking about the cortisol levels, talking about the testosterone coming down, and how to deal with those energies and not dealing with the training load. Because I'll speak on it on our next episode, but it's something that I struggle with myself, right? Coming down from having those sudden spurts of just, I wouldn't say anger, it's just energy, right? That days that you don't train and you haven't let that energy out. Your cortisol levels are high, testosterone is high, but you're just like, it's a Sunday and you've got nothing to do. And you've just got this 6 o'clock rolls around, you've been watching football, and then you just got this sudden spurt of energy that you got to do something. And it's like, you feel anxious and you want to grab something, you want to throw something, you want to like, what do I do? And I think that's something that, I'll speak on for myself when we get to that episode. Is just like, I don't, sometimes I don't know what to do. Sometimes I have to force myself to go to the gym to allow it to come out, because there's no other place to turn to. But just talking to you guys about what are some of the protocols that you guys put them through. And I think we'll save that for the next episode, because I feel like you guys have a lot to say on it. And I'm super excited about it because it's something that I want to learn myself. Like, what is the safe space to use, and what are those conditions, and where can athletes use that, and how can they know when it's about to come up, or it's about to, like, something is about to happen, to be able to kind of avoid the negative side of it, and then use it in a positive way, or know that that's going to happen when you come out of sport. Like, it's inevitable. Like, it does happen, because I hear it from a lot of my friends. Is that, like, we don't know. We've got all this energy built up. We've used to be in training. We used to go to practice. Now, like, it's a normal day. And what do I do with all of that?
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be super interesting to talk about in the next episode. So I'm super excited you guys brought that up, because it was something that I was going to say.
Well, there's a lot to it. Go ahead. I was just going to say, that's a tough thing to answer, but I would say theoretically, this is something that needs to go on inside these sport organizations before an athlete actually ever retires. That's something that in Canada, what I was working on extensively in the sport that I was helping to lead for the last couple of years. It's a sport responsibility, and I think this is a platform potentially to lobby sport organizations to take a bit more ownership and accountability for what happens within the sport organization, to help the athletes transition well into healthy, productive individuals. I can also speak from a sport medicine perspective, and as I think I mentioned to you before, the fellow I did speak to, that was the head of sport medicine for a particular NFL team, said his biggest concern was, again, the physiological load and management of the out of sport and who's handling that. And so that's an area that I'm heavily getting involved in. And so he's talking about his medical team taking a more active role in making sure that people have a transition plan, and who in the community does that. And if it's not something that, but it's not something that people can do, how do we rebuild that? So the answers aren't readily available to everybody, but I think this could be a platform to provide some of those answers for folks, or materials or whatnot. The first thing is the recognition is that physiologically, outside of who you are as a person, there is a condition to manage coming out of sport that needs to be managed appropriately. And it does involve continued training or navigation of that training load in some fashion. So whether you keep training, you are on, some people go on if they're a skier, they 4-run races for a while, they go and they become a 4-runner. They get involved around a sport activity, and they train as a someone who goes and catches passes for people, or is, they stay involved so that they can maintain, they can come down off that high. And then, like I said, career planning, I guess there's a transition period of the physiological piece and the training piece that needs to be dealt with, and recognition for the athlete and by those who are around that athlete that they will have a condition to navigate. And so I think however we can get that word out to sort of see that behaviors and thoughts and whatnot are going to potentially be erratic, or that person may not be the person, and there is stuff to be done around that, so that the family's supportive, that people are supportive. Like, I don't want to make this sound like it's oh my gosh, you're coming out of a war, but it is like dealing with, Army vets and things like that. There is something to that. So how do you, so I think that needs to be taken more seriously. And I really encourage you in this particular, with this opportunity that you have, and this could be something that you could be doing, is bringing awareness to that. And then how do you train? How do you keep training? Because I've known folks that have put on not just a little bit of weight, but inordinate weight, and can't get it off. And now there's other health issues, like significant health issues, from training that hard and then not being able to maintain that volume, and then self-hatred and all that comes with, like, now I'm 400 pounds. I knew somebody that became 400 pounds fairly radically after training as much as they had to train and not being able to train that high. And now they're dealing with heart issues and all manner of other things. So we got to talk about that. The job, the community, the need to be in an environment that is similar to yours is really, really important. And it's got to be a desensitization process. You don't just suddenly throw yourself into a desk job, and you've got to have an outlet somewhere, because that anger and that emotion, like you said, can become extremely unproductive. So where else can you put it? So training really, really hard will help take the edge off of it. Community support, alumni associations, things like that can help you have a safe space to at least hang out with people and do something for your support. I don't know what kind of alumni association you've had or can connect with, but there should be some good work done to have a really, organization should have very strong alumni network so that they can re-engage athletes quickly after they retire to get involved in initiatives to support and grow the sport, to help them train, to help them have therapy after if they need to sort of talk through the change in life, change in family, the family dynamics. Like I said, there's that staggering statistic that is really upsetting that I got from somebody that was the head of the NHL Players Association, that 83% of marriages end a year after retirement because they just can't manage the change for a number of reasons. So awareness is one. Number two, knowing that you're not alone in this type of thing, and that there's got to be a training plan around keeping your body going, so that, as Dorothy said, that like the mental part will start to follow and correct itself, and jobs and opportunities that keep you active and having outcomes attached to your efforts, and finding places like that as you sort of detox from that performance mindset. This is another thing. It's a long process to detox from the I run fast, I get rewarded. I do the best, I get rewarded. That's not just something that changes overnight. As you sort of sit around and you're in an environment where people don't seem to care about that the same way. As Dorothy said, maybe they shouldn't have jobs. I don't think he said that, but maybe you could be raising the bar a lot for some organizations. But I think it starts there. What do you do about it today at 5 p.m.? You go to the gym. You try to stay connected to your teammates as best you can. You keep realizing that your mood swings and things like that can be physiological. You reach out for help. I'm happy to help as much as I possibly can. Have these conversations, which I think are absolutely amazing and super courageous to be so, out there with this, because you're speaking about things that no one will speak about. And trust me, that down the road, that leads to some fairly pervasive mental health issues that I've been helping to figure out how to correct in the background. So that's all I have for right now. And that's why I think, for you for starting this part of the podcast, is I think that this is going to be a bit of a journey to figure that out. That's all I can say about that at that moment. I don't know. And recognizing that right away, I'll talk about this later, but just recognizing this is a thing, like the choices that you make coming out of sport will be really, really, really important to dial in, not accepting. You might need to accept that job as in the office, because that's the opportunity that's given to you. Maybe nothing else kind of comes up, but then you have a plan around what are you going to do to release, as you said, that maybe aggression or whatnot, as in the gym may not be enough, but recognizing that is part of the planning process. You've got this great opportunity where you are right now, but I think the big thing, I'll flip the script on you, is coming up with the community that you have with what do you think you need to be successful coming out? So what do you need? Do you need and making a list of it? And I can say what I think you need from being working as a physiologist. I can say what I believe you need from a training perspective, and I've lived it, having been married into the world of pro sport. I understand the demands and the changes and the personality and the requirements from the other side of it. But the conversations have to happen with your key stakeholders in your journey. That could be your family, your daughter. Your daughter definitely, in some fashion, as much as she's little and can understand some of those things, understanding what dad needs. Dad needs to go and punch something. Maybe that's not what you're telling her, but that I need to go and do something really physical. Your family, what they need to understand. Employers, what they need to understand. I'm used to being driven. How can I tame that? Is there an avenue in the organization where that's going to be, I'm going to go renovate the storage room for 12 solid hours, where I can put that, energy, because I need to have an outlet that's productive and let's harness those great things. Let's use it as a positive. And all these incredible lessons you've learned, here's what I bring to the table, and here's what I need to be successful. And can we work together on that? I mean, those are conversations that I've heard people that have navigated this world, or I've helped people navigate this world where they've been successful. Hey, I got a lot of energy. I got a lot of this. I need an outlet. Where in your organization will that fit? Well, nowhere. Okay, great. Glad I had that conversation. We didn't waste each other's time, and I'm frustrated. You're frustrated. I'm going to go on to the next thing. So a needs list. Let's do a needs assessment. What do you need? And then how can we start putting that information in front of people that can help? And hopefully that helps. That starts within the organization when people are playing, so that their transition out can be a lot more fruitful for everybody involved. So that's my challenge, I think, to you and your community, is let's come up with what you need.
Next episode, I'm gonna have my needs list for you guys. and we can jump straight into all of it and talk about it all and talk about how other athletes can make those needs lists and when they're going to organizations and using it. And also just, again, like we talked about, knowing where those energy levels are at and when they're going to hit, I think is a big point. So yeah, that's our next episode right there.
Amazing.
Well, ladies, thank you so much again for your time today. We're out with episode 3. I don't even know what episode it is again. I always just forget because we just continue to roll. But we'll jump back into it next week whenever we do, talking about cortisol levels, needs list, everything Coop's going through. Thank you, ladies.
Look forward to it. Thank you.